Welcome back to the radio. Tonight, we'll step quietly into a place that hums with silence, a place where the air is cool, the light is steady, and the walls carry more memories than any single mind could hold. The year is 2156, and you find yourself at the heart of a memory archive, a building designed to safeguard lives already lived. Here, stories are stacked like books, indexed like files, and tucked away with the precision of librarians who never sleep. Of course, the funny part is that people don't seem to want their past anymore. They hand over memories the way someone 100 years ago would hand over a coupon they'll never use, politely, and without looking back. It's the first business model in history where success depends on how badly customers want nothing. What hour is it where you're listening from? And are you tuning in from a city, a small town, or maybe somewhere in between? Drop a note in the comments. I'd love to know who wanders into the archive tonight. And if you haven't yet, remember to subscribe to Quilloren Radio so you'll always have a story waiting for you. Without further ado, let's begin. You arrive at the archive in the way one arrives at most places that hold too much silence, with a hesitation in your step, as if you're interrupting something private. The doors slide open with a sound that is less mechanical and more like an exhale. Cool air meets your face, the kind that doesn't remind you of weather, but instead of climate control. A faint scent lingers, not dust exactly, but something close to it, a smell that suggests things stored carefully and not touched often. Your shoes click softly against a polished surface that refuses to echo fully, as though even sound is subdued here. The entry corridor stretches longer than it really is, lined with smooth panels that glow faintly in pale blue. Each panel contains nothing to read, nothing to notice, just light. It's the design equivalent of someone nodding politely without saying a word. You walk slowly, because speed would feel out of place. There is no rush in a building where the tenants are memories themselves, and none of them are going anywhere. The air has a steady hum, perhaps from the filtration system above, or perhaps from the archive itself, as if the building maintains a heartbeat of its own. You place your hand briefly on the wall, more to reassure yourself than the structure. The panel is cool, almost too smooth, like touching glass that has forgotten how to smudge. Somewhere deeper in the building, a faint chime rings, not announcing your presence, but marking time the way a grandfather clock might. It is the only thing here that dares to interrupt the hush. The corridor ends at a gate, not grand or heavy, but practical. It slides upward at your approach, exposing the first chamber of the archive. The room is large, though it resists grandeur. Its ceilings are high, yet the lighting keeps everything within reach. Rows of compartments stretch out like orderly fields, all labeled with glowing numbers, though you've stopped trying to make sense of their sequence. The archive does not sort memories the way you'd sort socks, and to be fair, even your socks rarely make it into perfect pairs. The temperature shifts slightly as you step inside, cooler at the edges, warmer at the center. The walls here are lined with panels that breathe with light, pulsing in slow rhythm, like the surface of a calm lake touched by wind. Each pulse represents a stored memory, though the exact mechanism is beyond you. You've been told the process is technical, but then so is bread making, and no one really wants the chemical breakdown explained when they just want a sandwich. You move toward your usual station, passing between aisles of memory slots. Each slot hums faintly, the sound varying just enough to remind you that no two memories are alike. Some hums are higher, like a distant kettle. Others are lower, more like the rumble of a refrigerator that's been running for too long. Together, they make a soft chorus, a harmony of past lives compressed into steady tones. It's not music, but it could be mistaken for it if you closed your eyes. You pause at one section, drawn by a light that flickers slightly off beat. It isn't broken. The archive doesn't really allow for broken, but it is irregular, like someone tapping their finger too quickly on a desk. You stand there for a moment, tilting your head as though the angle might explain it. It doesn't, of course. The archive rarely explains itself. You chuckle softly, the sound a bit foreign against the backdrop of quiet hums. In a place where people store whole lives, the most noticeable thing is often a single flicker of light behaving badly. The path leads you to a staircase that spirals downward. Each step carries the faint creak of pressure, though you know the materials are stronger than anything you could wear down. The sound exists, perhaps, just to remind you of your weight, proof that you're still anchored to gravity in a building full of intangible things. The railing is smooth, not cold, and as your hand glides along it, you think of all the other hands that have done the same. Few of them belong to visitors anymore. Most people these days don't come here to deposit their memories personally. They transmit them digitally from afar, as if even their pasts were too inconvenient to deliver in person. The lower floor opens up wider than you remember. Rows of cabinets stretch outward, their surfaces matte and soft to the eye. Each cabinet contains thousands of fragments, neatly sealed and tagged. If you listen carefully, you can almost hear them whisper, not in voices, but in tones of density, like the sound of air shifting in a closed jar. Some people say they sense echoes of laughter or footsteps while walking these aisles, but it's only the mind reaching for patterns. Still, you let yourself listen. It's not the worst thing to hear something that isn't there, especially in a place designed to hold what no longer is. The archive's center chamber waits beyond another narrow gate. This one opens more slowly, as though savoring the act of permission. Inside, the lighting softens to a golden hue, not warm exactly, but gentler than the blue glow above. The ceiling here is higher still, curved like a dome, giving the impression that the room is less a vault and more a sky turned upside down. You've always liked this part of the archive. It feels less like storage and more like space offered up to memory itself. You take a deep breath. The air is faintly sweet here, carrying a hint of something botanical, though you've never found the source. Perhaps the filters are designed to add a touch of comfort. Or perhaps some long ago engineer thought memories deserve to smell faintly of lavender. Whatever the reason, it's a scent you associate with arrival, and it settles you each time. In the corner stands your station, a modest desk, a console screen, and a chair that squeaks just enough to remind you it's real. You lower yourself into it, the cushions sighing in that way old cushions do, as though remembering the shape of everyone who sat here before you. You place your hands on the desk, noticing a small scratch near the edge. You've traced it before, countless times, but never asked who left it. In a building dedicated to preserving memories, some details are allowed to stay unclaimed. You glance upward at the ceiling's faint shimmer, then back at the rows stretching out before you. Each row represents lives condensed into data, organized, sealed, and willingly abandoned. You find the thought oddly comforting, not because people are letting go, but because the archive still takes them in. The world outside may no longer care about the past, but within these walls, the past hums on faithfully. You lean back in your chair, hearing the inevitable squeak. It is the only rebellious sound the archive allows. And in its small way, it reassures you. For all the silence and precision, for all the smooth panels and glowing aisles, something here still remembers how to complain. The air in the archive holds a faint coolness, but it's the scent that catches you, not the lavender hint of the upper chamber, but something sharper now, almost metallic. You tilt your head, breathing more slowly, and it strikes you that the smell is a bit like rain against a rusted railing, the kind that leaves your hands orange if you touch it. The thought takes you somewhere else entirely, before you can stop it. Suddenly, you're no longer in the archive, but standing on the porch of a small apartment decades earlier, when rain used to sweep through the city with less hesitation. The railing there was thin, painted white once, but the weather had long ago chosen its own color. You remember gripping it absent-mindedly while watching the street below, and then noticing your palms stained with flakes of rust. At the time you muttered something like, "Well, that's new," to no one in particular. Your voice had the same deadpan tone you still carry now, because even then you believed small surprises deserved commentary, even if the only audience was a damp sidewalk. The air of that morning comes back clearly, warm but not oppressive, humid enough to make your shirt cling, but not enough to drive you indoors. You hear the sound of tires rolling cautiously on wet pavement, a rhythm steady enough to be soothing. Somewhere below, a neighbor's radio played faintly, a news anchor speaking too fast about something you didn't need to remember. The world was awake in pieces, not all at once, and you found yourself standing still at the railing longer than necessary. From your porch, you could see a row of modest storefronts. A laundromat with a door that refused to close all the way. A diner with a sign that buzzed whenever the light flickered. A corner store with shelves so narrow you had to turn sideways just to pass another person. Each detail felt ordinary then, unremarkable. Yet in this memory they glow with a kind of softness, as if every cracked tile and crooked letter was part of a larger design meant only for you to notice. You remember walking down the steps after the rain eased, your shoes squeaking against the concrete. Puddles reflected the storefront lights in skewed shapes, like small paintings you had to step around. You bought coffee at the diner, though calling it coffee was generous. It was the kind of brew that tasted like it had been made for workers 3 shifts ago, and politely reheated ever since. You didn't complain. There was comfort in its predictability, even if it came with a burnt aftertaste. The waitress, who always wore her hair in a bun too tight for her own comfort, slid the mug towards you without looking up from her crossword. You nodded your thanks, because words felt unnecessary in that place. At the time, you thought you were just passing a morning. Now, in recollection, you realize you were gathering fragments, small, stubborn pieces of daily life that would one day lodge themselves into your senses. The way the counter was slightly sticky no matter how much it had been wiped. The soft clang of the diner door when it didn't shut properly. The odd delight of watching a man at the counter eat pancakes at a pace that suggested he had no other plan for the day. These weren't grand events. They were just there. And yet they remain, refusing to leave, even as so much else has faded. You sip your coffee in that memory, and notice how the heat spread across your palms, a feeling both grounding and temporary. The cup had a small chip near the rim, and you made a quiet game of rotating it until the flaw didn't touch your lips. That was the kind of small strategy you always made, inconsequential, but necessary for comfort. You watch as the waitress sighs at her crossword, muttering something about how no 6 letter word should have 3 Z's. You nearly laugh into your mug, but you don't. The humor stays with you silently, tucked between the sound of rain dripping from the diner's awning and the low murmur of other patrons who also didn't feel the need to speak much. The memory lingers longer than you expect, holding you in its soft edges. You recall walking back upstairs after finishing the coffee, shoes tracking a faint wetness onto the first few steps. You held the railing again, the rust flaking just enough to leave another stain. At the time, you thought briefly about cleaning it, then decided against it. Some things weren't meant to be polished. Some things were just meant to stay as they were, imperfect, faintly inconvenient, yet oddly reassuring in their consistency. The sound that returns you to the present isn't sharp. It's the low hum of the archive around you, rising in your awareness as the diner fades. The aisles of memories stretch again in neat rows, the pulsing lights steady in their rhythm. You blink once, noticing the metallic scent still faint in the air, and wonder if perhaps the archive knew what it was doing when it led you back there. Or maybe it's just your mind, always ready to take the smallest detail and stretch it into something bigger. You rest your hand on the desk, half, expecting to see rust on your palm again, though of course there is none. The present holds you once more, with its steady hum, its faint cool air, and its endless glow of stored pasts. The memory drifts away, not gone, just quieter, like a song that fades into the background after the radio dial turns. What stays is not the diner, not the porch, not the taste of burnt coffee. What stays is the feeling of stillness, a sense that the ordinary had weight, even when you didn't think to give it any. And as you sit there in the archive, you realize that weight has followed you all along, tucked quietly into the folds of your mind, humming alongside everything else. A soft knock sounds at the edge of the chamber, though you know no one really needs to knock here. The doors open automatically, politely, the way they always do. Still, someone has chosen to rap gently on the frame as if entering a living room instead of a memory repository. You look up from your desk to see one of the assistants, a younger man with hair so neat it seems he might iron it every morning. He carries a small slate in his hands, the kind people use when they want to look professional while only pretending to take notes. "Morning," he says, voice hushed by the archive's acoustics. "Did you want the light filter set warmer today?" You glance upward at the dome's glow. It looks fine, as it always does. "This is the same as yesterday, right?" You ask. "Almost," he replies. "It's half a degree cooler." You tilt your head. "That explains why my mood is precisely half a degree worse." He smiles, jotting something down on his slate, though you know it's just a doodle. "I'll log that," he says. You don't mind these exchanges. They aren't necessary, but that's what makes them work. In a place where most people interact with the archive remotely, a real conversation feels like the equivalent of fresh air. The assistant lingers for a moment, scanning the glowing aisles. He clears his throat softly, as though nervous about disturbing the hum. "Do you ever think," he asks, "that some of these people might regret forgetting things?" The question hangs lightly in the air, not heavy, just curious. You lean back in your squeaky chair, which offers its usual commentary. If they regretted it, they'd have to remember what they forgot. That seems like a difficult business model. He chuckles, nodding, and taps the slate closed. "Fair point. I'll adjust the filter back to yesterday's setting." 1 degree of cheer restored. With that, he steps away, his shoes quiet against the floor, leaving behind only the faint trace of conversation. A moment later, you hear a different sound, the rustle of someone passing too carefully between aisles. You glance over and see an older woman moving slowly with the help of a cane. Visitors are rare these days, rarer still in person, but she navigates the space as if she has every right to be here. She pauses near a glowing panel and turns her head toward you. "Is this the right section for personal recollections?" she asks, her voice gentle but steady. "In a way," you say, rising from your chair. Though technically all sections are. What kind of recollection were you hoping to misplace? She considers the phrasing, then laughs softly. A few birthdays. Not mina. Other people's. They add up. You guide her toward a nearby console. The screen brightens as you approach, offering the usual prompts. She hands you a small card, which feels outdated even by the archive's standards. You slide it into the slot, watching as her request appears. Birthdays. Dozens of them, scattered across years. She sighs in relief. Too many cakes, she says simply. And too many songs sung off key. I'll admit, you reply, this is the first time I've seen someone trade memories because of poor singing. Well, she says with a faint smile, there's only so much enthusiasm you can fake before the candles go out. The console hums as it processes her request, and the glowing panel nearby brightens momentarily before settling back into rhythm. She thanks you quietly, tapping her cane against the floor once like a signature, then begins her slow path back toward the doors. You don't stop her. In the archive, goodbyes don't need ceremony. Later, another presence enters, this time a delivery technician dropping off a fresh stack of storage units. He doesn't look around much. People who bring crates into the archive never really linger. They act like the shelves might open up and swallow them whole. He sets the stack down near your desk and wipes his forehead. You folks ever run out of space? He asks. Not yet, you reply. Though sometimes I pretend we did, just to see the panic on people's faces. He raises an eyebrow. Does it work? Every time. He laughs, shaking his head. I'd ask what happens if you really do run out, but I don't want to know the answer. You'd be the first to notice, you tell him, nodding at the crates. His laugh echoes faintly, bouncing once against the domed ceiling before dissolving. He leaves quickly, as expected, boots heavier on the floor than anyone else's. You're left with the quiet again, punctuated only by the chorus of humming panels. The stillness stretches for a while, until the intercom chirps softly. A voice filters through, belonging to someone at the entry desk above. We had a call, the voice says. Someone asked if they could store the memory of buying socks. You pause, considering this. Did they specify which pair? No, the voice replies. Just the act of buying them. You nod, though no one can see it. I suppose some shopping trips really are traumatic. There's a faint laugh on the line, then the click of disconnection. The hum resumes as though the archive is amused too, though of course it isn't. These moments aren't dramatic. They aren't meant to be. But they accumulate, layering one soft exchange on top of another until the archive feels less like a vault and more like a neighborhood of quiet voices. The young assistant with his note, slate. The older woman and her birthdays. The delivery worker, suspicious of the shelves. Even the disembodied voice over the intercom. Each leaves a trace, small but present, like fingerprints pressed into the calm air. You lean back once more, your chair groaning with predictable discontent. The dome glows faintly above, the aisles hum steadily around, and in the midst of it all you feel less like a solitary keeper of forgotten things, and more like part of a slow, steady conversation that never fully ends. You rest your hands on the desk, the surface smooth beneath your palms, and a thought surfaces, not about the present, not about the visitors who passed through the archive, but about the years before you arrived here at all. The memory isn't sharp. It never begins with a dramatic event or clear turning point. It just settles in like an old chair you've sat in so many times that the cushion eventually stopped pretending to resist you. Before this place, you worked in a building that pretended to be important but wasn't. Rows of cubicles lined the floor, each one identical except for the choice of desk trinkets. Some people had photos of families smiling too hard. Others had mugs with slogans about coffee being their only friend. You had nothing but a stack of plain notebooks and a pen that clicked too loudly. People often asked why you didn't decorate. You told them you were saving the wall space in case inspiration ever showed up. It never did. The days there began with the sound of printers coughing to life. The paper always came out warm, which was the best part of the job. There was something oddly comforting about holding a fresh stack, the heat clinging to your fingers for a moment before fading. You could have stopped right there, holding paper, inhaling its faint chemical scent, pretending that was enough work to count as progress. But of course, there were always tasks. Data to sort. Numbers to move. Reports to file. Each day was a quiet choreography of pretending it mattered. You remember the bus rides more clearly than the work itself. Early mornings, the engine's low groan vibrating through the floor, seats that carried the faint scent of damp upholstery. The windows fogged easily, and you'd draw lines with your fingertip absent-mindedly, erasing them again before anyone noticed. Sometimes, sunlight streamed through at the exact angle to make the glass glow, and you found yourself staring at the light instead of preparing for the day. Nobody minded. Nobody noticed. It was easy to disappear into the rhythm of the commute. There was a coffee shop on the corner across from that office building, though calling it a shop was generous. It was more of a converted stall, narrow enough that two people couldn't stand inside comfortably. The barista knew your order after the third week, which was efficient, but also mildly unsettling. You sometimes wondered if that was her skill, memorizing regulars before they realized they'd become regulars. The coffee wasn't exceptional, but the sound of the grinder became part of your mornings, a steady roar that reminded you of arrival. During those years, your sense of time came less from calendars and more from the small changes in your desk neighbors. One person grew a collection of miniature cacti, lining them neatly by size as though rehearsing a parade. Another taped motivational notes to her monitor, gradually covering the screen until she had to peel some away just to see her emails. You, in contrast, kept your notebooks. Row after row of lined pages filled with neat handwriting that you almost never revisited. They were less about recording anything, and more about creating proof that you'd been there. You weren't unhappy. That word never really applied. It was more that everything felt provisional, as though you were waiting for something but couldn't name what. Some mornings you thought of quitting, then shrugged and took the bus anyway. Other mornings you thought of staying forever, which made you laugh in the same way someone laughs when they find socks still damp from the dryer. The humor wasn't cruel. It was just factual. It wasn't until much later that the archive came into view, though you don't remember how exactly. A notice online, perhaps. A quiet suggestion from someone you'd half forgotten. You applied half, seriously, convinced it was just another job with a fancier title. But when you first walked into the archive, the silence caught you. It wasn't empty silence, the kind that grows heavy and awkward. It was the kind that feels deliberate, shaped, almost cultivated. You realized in that moment that this was the opposite of cubicles filled with clicking pens and fake plants. Here, The hum of stored memories did the talking, and you didn't need to fill the air with anything extra. Looking back now, the distance between those two places feels wider than it really was. The office, with its warm paper and humming printers, still exists in you somewhere, softened by time. You can almost hear the clatter of keyboards, the occasional sigh of someone pretending to concentrate. You can almost taste the stale coffee you kept drinking anyway. It's all there, faint and worn at the edges, like postcards faded from being left in sunlight. You don't miss it. That would be too strong a word. But you recognize it as part of the trail that led you here, even if it wasn't a straight line. Without those bus rides, without those notebooks of forgotten scribbles, perhaps the archive wouldn't feel so steady now. Perhaps silence wouldn't mean as much. Perhaps you wouldn't have developed the patience to listen to a building breathe. The thought lingers, not as nostalgia, but as acknowledgement. The archive holds the memories of others, carefully catalogued and sealed. You hold your own past in softer fashion, not filed away, not forgotten, just sitting quietly in the background, like a song you don't play often, but still know by heart. And in the hush of the chamber, surrounded by the low chorus of lives willingly set aside, you find yourself grateful for the ordinary roads that brought you here, even if they were paved with paperwork and burnt coffee. Your gaze drifts across the chamber until it settles on something that always draws you back, no matter how many hours you've spent in this place. At the far end of your desk, tucked neatly into a recessed alcove, sits a single drawer. Not one of the towering cabinets that hold thousands of memories. Not one of the glowing panels that hum faintly with stored lives. Just one modest drawer, barely large enough to hold a shoebox. You slide it open, and the sound is different from the rest of the archive. The larger compartments open with the precision of machines that don't care whether you notice them. This drawer opens with a sigh, the gentle scrape of metal against track, as though it acknowledges your attention. Inside rests a small container, smooth and rounded, its surface the dull gray of brushed steel. You've handled it countless times, and still, each time feels slightly ceremonial, as though you're repeating a gesture that predates you. The container has no label. No digital tag hovers above it. No hum escapes its sealed form. It exists outside the usual order, tucked here, almost like an afterthought. Yet you know it was placed with intent, because nothing in the archive happens by accident. You lift it carefully, its weight familiar in your hands. Not heavy, not light, just balanced. The exact kind of weight that reminds you of holding a loaf of bread. You set it on the desk, running your fingertips along its surface. The texture is faintly ridged, not smooth, and each time your skin crosses those grooves, you feel the pull of memory, though not of the archive's kind. This one belongs to you alone. The grooves remind you of your uncle's old cabinet, the one that sat in a corner of his living room long before you ever dreamed of a memory archive. That cabinet smelled perpetually of wood polish, a scent that clung even to the books stacked on top. You used to run your fingers along its edges absent-mindedly during visits, tracing the same patterns again and again. The association is faint but steady, the container's ridges and the cabinet's edges, one echoing the other across decades. You don't dwell on it much. You don't need to. The connection is enough, and in some way it makes this drawer feel like home base, an anchor within the archive's endless order. You lean back slightly, still holding the container, and recall how your uncle used to open that cabinet with exaggerated effort, as if it weighed 100 pounds more than it actually did. He claimed it was to keep children from stealing the good magazines. You were never sure what counted as good, since the shelves mostly held recipe clippings and old almanacs. But the ritual stayed with you, The unnecessary grunt, the slow creak of hinges, the satisfaction of finding something ordinary behind the door. The container on your desk doesn't creak. It doesn't grunt. When you press its hidden latch, it simply opens, as obedient as a well-oiled hinge. Inside are not recipes or almanacs, but a small set of blank cards. That's all. Smooth, heavy cardstock, cut with precision, stacked neatly as though someone expected you to use them for something. You never have. You never will. And yet, their presence comforts you. Sometimes, when the archive grows too quiet, you lift one card and hold it between your fingers. The weight is enough to remind you that it's real. The texture is enough to remind you that tangibility matters, even in a world where memories are uploaded, filtered, and dismissed without touch. You don't write on the cards. You don't shuffle them. You simply acknowledge them, the way one acknowledges a reliable piece of furniture in a familiar room. You've wondered occasionally why this drawer exists. It doesn't appear on the schematics. No one mentions it in the logs. The assistants never ask about it, though you suspect at least one has noticed. Perhaps the drawer is intentional, a small allowance for keepers like you to have something grounding, something not part of the system. Or perhaps it was simply overlooked, and you've assigned it more meaning than it deserves. You don't mind either way. Some anchors are chosen. Others are stumbled upon. Both hold just as well. The hum of the archive continues around you, steady as breath. You rest the card back in the container, closing the lid softly, letting the latch click with finality. You place the container back in its drawer, sliding it shut. The sighing scrape sounds again, reassuring you that the drawer remains yours to open whenever you wish. You sit quietly for a moment, the memory of the old cabinet still fresh. You can almost smell the polish, hear the unnecessary grunt of your uncle lifting the door, see the almanacs stacked haphazardly inside. None of it mattered then, and yet all of it matters now, softened into a memory that refuses to fade. That is the way of anchors. They don't need to be grand or significant. They only need to hold. Your chair squeaks as you shift back to your console, and you allow yourself a faint smile. In a building where people abandon their pasts, you find yourself tethered to yours, not by photographs or speeches, but by the feel of grooves under your fingertips, by the weight of blank cards in a container, by the echo of a cabinet door opening with unnecessary ceremony. It's not poetic. It's not profound. It's just what steadies you. And in the archive, steadiness is enough. If you've been enjoying your time here in the archive so far, I'd be glad if you subscribe to Quilloren Radio. It helps keep these quiet stories waiting for you whenever you need them. Leave a comment too. I'd love to know you're out there listening, sharing this stillness with me. The archive hums steadily around you, each panel glowing with its private rhythm, yet your mind wanders beyond these aisles. It doesn't take much, the squeak of your chair, the faint pulse of light, the quiet that never interrupts, to open a door into thoughts of what you never quite did. They aren't regrets, not really. Just lingering wishes that float in the background, like faint echoes of music you can't place. One thought surfaces often. You once pictured yourself as a teacher. Not of anything lofty, not history or philosophy, just something practical. You imagine standing at the front of a classroom explaining how to balance ledgers, or maybe how to brew coffee without ruining it. You liked the idea of chalk dust clinging to your fingertips, of students half listening while doodling in their notebooks. There was a comfort in that image, even if you never sought it out. At the time, You told yourself you didn't have the patience. Looking back, you realize you did. You just spent it waiting for buses, waiting for printers, waiting for things that no one remembers now. Another wish flickers. Cooking. For a brief season in your 20s, you collected recipes with the earnest belief you might one day master them. You pictured hosting dinners where people complimented your roasted chicken, nodding with polite astonishment at your soufflé. The reality was closer to smoke alarms and pancakes that doubled as exercise equipment. You retired the ambition quietly, sliding the recipe cards into a drawer you never opened again. Still, sometimes when the archive's air carries that faint lavender note, you think of how basil smelled fresh on your fingers, and you wonder what it would have been like if you'd kept trying. Perhaps you'd have been a competent cook by now. Or perhaps the fire department would simply know you by name. There were other paths, softer ones. You once wanted to learn the piano. Not to perform, just to play in the evenings, letting your own fingers carry tunes instead of leaving them to recordings. You even sat down once in front of a borrowed keyboard, pressing middle C as though it might unlock something profound. The sound was nice, simple, reassuring, but then you stopped, overwhelmed by the sheer number of keys waiting their turn. You told yourself you'd try again another day. That day never arrived, though sometimes you still picture yourself playing slowly in a quiet room, no audience, no purpose, but to fill the air with notes that belong only to you. And then there was travel, not the dramatic kind, not expeditions or adventures, but just the idea of living in another city for a while. You once thought about renting a small place near the coast, waking each day to the sound of waves that didn't care about schedules. You browsed listings half seriously, convincing yourself you might make the move. But the logistics piled up, packing boxes, new jobs, new routines. You let the thought slip away, telling yourself the timing wasn't right. Maybe it never would be. And yet, when you hear the archive's ventilation system sighing, you sometimes mistake it for ocean surf, and for a moment the unchosen life brushes close. There was even a time, brief and strange, when you imagined becoming a gardener. You kept one potted plant in your apartment, a stubborn fern that refused to thrive. You tried watering it on a schedule, speaking to it politely, even giving it a spot by the sunniest window. Nothing worked. The fern drooped daily, unimpressed by your efforts, and eventually you gave up. Still, the thought lingered. You pictured yourself surrounded by rows of green, kneeling in the soil, cultivating life with your own hands. Reality reminded you that you could barely keep parsley alive. You laughed at yourself then, and you still do now. But the wish remains in some quiet corner, softened into a harmless daydream. The archive doesn't mind these drifting thoughts. In fact, it seems to encourage them, its hum leaving enough space for daydreams to expand. You find yourself asking softly, "Did I wait too long?" The question isn't sharp. It doesn't sting. It's more like standing in front of a closed door and wondering if the handle was ever unlocked. Maybe you could still learn to cook, still sit at a piano, still rent a flat near the ocean. Or maybe not. And maybe that's fine. The possibility lingers without pressure. Your humor joins you here, dry as ever. You think about that cooking phase and remember the moment you whisked pancake batter so aggressively your arm ached for 2 days. You wonder if a pastry chef ever counts whisking as cardio. You think about the piano and picture yourself stuck on the same 3 notes, neighbors politely pretending not to notice. You think about the teaching idea and laugh at how easily your patience drained just waiting for the bus, Perhaps a room full of distracted students would have finished you off entirely. Yet the thoughts are gentle, not critical. They exist more as companions than judgments. They sit beside you in the archive, like visitors who have no requests, only quiet stories about what might have been. You let them stay. You lean back, eyes half on the glowing panels, half on the memory of possibilities you set aside. Some are still within reach, technically. You could buy a cookbook tomorrow, though you'd probably skip half the ingredients. You could enroll in a music class, though the thought of practicing scales might outlast your enthusiasm. You could rent a small place near the water, though packing would test your patience faster than students ever could. The truth is, you don't feel urgency. The wishes don't demand fulfillment. They exist to remind you that your life could have been different, and that different wouldn't necessarily have been better or worse. Just different. And in that difference, there's a quiet kind of peace. You don't have to live every possibility. You only need to acknowledge them. Like unopened doors in a hallway, they're still part of the building, even if you never stepped inside. And in some way, their presence steadies you, just as much as the archive's hum. You shift in your chair, its squeak echoing the way possibilities sometimes echo. Faint, persistent, oddly grounding. The aisles stretch on in steady light, and you sit among them with your unchosen lives tucked gently around you, not burdens, not regrets, simply quiet companions. On the far side of the chamber, tucked against a wall where the light hums faintly lower, rests a container you don't open often. It isn't much to look at. A simple box made of layered glass, corners reinforced with brushed metal, the kind of design that insists on function without boasting about it. You lift it carefully, noticing again how cool the surface feels, like stone left in shade. The weight is uneven, as though its contents shift slightly when you move it, reminding you this isn't just a hollow prop. You bring the container to your desk, the squeak of your chair greeting you like an old friend, and ease open the lid. The archive always greets you with silence, but the act of opening a box feels like creating silence inside silence, a pause within a pause. Inside rests a scatter of objects, ordinary yet dissonant, as if chosen without logic. You don't try to impose a pattern. You simply begin, as one might stroll slowly through a yard sale, not to buy, but to look. The first object you lift is a postcard. Its edges are softened from handling, corners slightly bent inward. The front shows a photo of a pier extending into water. The colors just faded enough to suggest it was printed decades ago. The caption reads, "Wish you were here," though the handwriting beneath changes the meaning entirely. In neat block letters, someone had written, "No, really. Wish you were here. I can't carry all these groceries alone." You chuckle softly, picturing someone standing on that pier holding a bag of produce, wondering why sentiment and practicality had collided on a single card. You set the postcard aside and pick up a coin, larger than the one still in circulation. Its face shows a bird mid-flight, wings stretched wide, though the detail is nearly worn away. You run your thumb across it, and think about how many hands must have done the same. Coins are ordinary, but this one feels almost ceremonial, as if each worn edge carries the weight of a transaction someone cared about more than they admitted. Next, a small bundle of receipts bound with a thin rubber band. You slip one free, unfolding the paper to see the list of items: a jar of olives, 2 loaves of bread, a magazine. Nothing dramatic. Yet at the bottom, the cashier's printed name reads Homer, which you find unintentionally poetic. To think that olives and bread were once dispensed by someone named after a poet, it's the sort of odd connection you can't invent, only stumble into. You return the receipts carefully, rubber bands snapping softly as though it too resents being stretched. There's a photograph tucked between the stack, glossy and small. It shows 3 people seated on a couch, their faces blurred by time or by the technology used. What you notice most is the blanket draped across their laps, patterned with bright squares that seem too loud for the calm expressions above. You find yourself oddly focused on the blanket, imagining it folded in a linen closet somewhere, still carrying traces of warmth. The people may be harder to recall, but the blanket looks ready to be recognized instantly. Beside the photograph lies a tiny brass key. It isn't labeled, its teeth worn smooth. You hold it lightly, feeling its chill against your palm. Keys are promises, even when their locks no longer exist. You wonder briefly, was this one meant for a door, a box, a drawer? Did someone forget the object and only remember the key? Or did they decide the mystery was more interesting than the answer? Either way, the key sits quietly in your hand, as content to remain unopened as any memory sealed here. A folded note catches your attention next. You open it gently, the creases soft but resilient, as though it has been unfolded many times before. The handwriting is hurried, slanted, and at the top it reads, "Don't forget the milk." The rest is a list of items that range from practical, soap, flour, string, to oddly specific, the blue pencil, not the green one. At the bottom, in smaller letters, the writer had added, P.S. Don't forget yourself either. You smile faintly, struck by how reminders can shift from mundane to intimate without warning. You set the note aside and notice something unexpected, a ticket stub. Printed in faded ink, it announces admission to a film theater long since closed. The movie title isn't legible, worn away completely. Only the seat number remains, row G, seat 12. You picture someone sitting there, popcorn in hand, waiting for a film they no longer remember. The thought comforts you. Sometimes the act of attending was the memory itself, not the story on the screen. Near the bottom of the box rests a seashell, its spiral intact, the surface flecked with faint pink. You turn it slowly in your hand, half, expecting to hear the ocean pressed against your ear. Instead, you hear the archive's hum, steady as breath, blending with the shell's hollow. It feels almost deliberate, as though the shell borrowed the archive's sound and decided to keep it. There's also a pencil, unsharpened, the paint chipped near its tip. You find yourself wondering what words it never wrote, what marks it never left. Most objects are remembered for what they did. This pencil seems remembered for what it almost did, a life of sentences cut short before they began. Finally, at the very bottom, lies a button. Plain plastic, off, white, with 2 small holes in its center. It might have fallen from a shirt no one kept. It might have been saved from a jacket no one wore again. And yet, here it is, preserved among postcards and seashells, as if someone decided even the most overlooked detail deserved its own quiet archive. You sit back, surveying the spread of objects. None of them tell a full story. Together, though, they weave a kind of collage, a reminder that lives are stitched from fragments, not from grand arcs. A postcard with groceries. A receipt with a poet's name. A shell that hums with borrowed silence. These are not treasures in the usual sense. They are the pieces that anchor memory precisely because they seem so small. You return them one by one to the box, stacking the cards neatly, letting the receipts fold into their soft bundle, tucking the button back into its shallow corner. You close the lid slowly, letting the click of metal reassure you that the collage remains intact. The archive hums on, panels glowing steadily, aisles stretching into quiet. You rest your hand on the closed container, not to claim it, not to protect it, but simply to acknowledge it. Some memories arrive as entire stories. Others live as fragments, scattered and ordinary. Together, they form something larger, something you can never quite explain, only hold. You sit with the container closed, your hand still resting against its lid, and your mind wanders further than the archive itself. It stretches past the aisles, past the hum of the walls, past even the day outside, and into a time you'll never see directly. The thought isn't urgent. It doesn't arrive with any great weight. It's simply a slow turning of the mind, the way a lazy current carries a leaf downstream without resistance. What will this place be like in 40 years? You look around at the shelves, the softly pulsing indicators that blink in quiet rhythm, the tables with their polished surfaces, and you wonder whether anyone will still walk these halls with the same patience. Will there still be an archive at all? Or will the idea of remembering seem like an outdated luxury? Perhaps people in the future will consider memory just another outdated tool, like paper maps or floppy disks, stored in museums where visitors squint at labels and pretend they understand. Maybe, by then, technology will render this entire building unnecessary. Every memory could be stored on a device no larger than a coin, slipped into a pocket and carried without thought. You imagine someone tossing it into a drawer beside spare batteries and loose screws, not because it is unimportant, but because that's where forgotten essentials always seem to end up. You half smile at the idea that the grand future of memory might be reduced to rummaging through a junk drawer to retrieve yourself. You glance at the ceiling, where the light is steady but never warm, and you wonder whether someone will finally adjust the brightness. It has always been just slightly too dim, as though the designers wanted you to squint enough to take the place seriously. Will someone in 40 years look up and mutter, "Why didn't they ever fix this?" Or will they leave it unchanged out of habit, because by then the dimness feels like part of the archive itself, inseparable from its identity? Another thought drifts in. The chairs. Yours creaks every time you lean back, the sound a companion as much as an annoyance. Will future archivists inherit new chairs, ones that adjust smoothly and silently, designed by ergonomic committees with strong opinions? Or will they inherit these same creaking seats, worn by decades of shifts, each one singing out its complaints like old friends who refuse to stay quiet? The humor of it makes you breathe out a quiet laugh, the sort that doesn't echo, just lingers gently in your chest. You think about the way people bring in their memories now, almost casually, like recycling. They hand them over with a signature, sometimes a shrug, and walk out lighter. 40 years from now, will that indifference deepen? Will people deposit whole decades at once, dropping their 20s into a bin labeled sorted, and moving on without ever checking what was inside? Or will there be a reversal, a longing to hold on to everything again, as if the very act of forgetting had made people suddenly greedy for remembrance? Your hand shifts on the container's lid, and you consider whether anyone will ever open this same box years ahead. Will they lift the postcard and wonder about the groceries, the coin with its bird, the shell with its spiral? Or will the objects dissolve into data, scanned, indexed, tagged with metadata so thorough that no imagination is required? Efficiency may be the enemy of wonder, you think. Perhaps the box will feel heavier not with time, but with the absence of curiosity. You picture someone standing where you are now, but not you. Someone younger, someone not yet born, someone who will step into this space as if it always belonged to them. Will they perform the same motions, sliding their fingers over lids, tracing the grooves of old coins, reading slips of paper with puzzled half-smiles? Or will they stand at a sleek console, tapping a surface that does everything instantly, memories loading in fractions of a second? Will they sigh with relief at the convenience, or sigh with boredom because efficiency has erased the quiet parts? Your gaze wanders to the walls. They have always hummed faintly, a sound so steady you forget it's there, until you stop to notice. Will those walls still hum 40 years from now, or will silence fall differently, sharp and absolute, in a place run by machines that don't need to make noise? Perhaps the future will design silence so clean it feels less like absence and more like pressure, the weight of nothing pressing in from all sides. Would that be peaceful, or would it be too much? A silence you long to break with even the creak of a chair. Then there are the smaller details, the little inefficiencies that cling to daily life. The vents that never distribute air evenly. The drawer that sticks no matter how you tug. The panel that flickers at odd hours as though it is shy. Will anyone care enough to fix them? Or will they become traditions, quirks passed down to the next generation of archivists who roll their eyes at them and yet secretly accept them as companions? You imagine someone 40 years from now saying, "Oh, that vent?" It's always been like that, with the same casual pride people reserve for heirlooms. You lean back, listening to your own breath as it blends with the hum. The archive is steady now, but the future never promises to keep steadiness intact. What if this space becomes a cafe, or an apartment, or an office for something no one yet imagines? What if the shelves are dismantled, the boxes scattered, the hum silenced forever? Perhaps people will stroll through, not realizing what the building once held, their conversations echoing in a space that once contained millions of quiet lives. And yet, you don't feel sadness at the thought. Time always reshaped place. 40 years from now, memory itself may have taken on a form no one today would recognize. Perhaps the archive will dissolve into a network of invisible signals, woven into the air like weather. Or perhaps it will survive, exactly as it is, outdated yet comforting, preserved like an antique shop that refuses to modernize. You wonder if, one day, nostalgia will grow strong enough to keep even this dim lighting and squeaky chairs intact. The questions stay open. They don't weigh on you. They drift like leaves in the current, rising and falling, never needing answers. The archive hums on as it always has. You shift in your chair, and the creak answers you again, its voice strangely reassuring. Perhaps in 40 years, someone else will lean back here, hear the same sound, and feel the same quiet company. You rest in your chair, letting the hum of the archive carry your thoughts further, and a small, unlikely idea drifts into your mind. The kind of thought that could vanish if you blink too quickly, but feels entirely real while it lingers. Perhaps the pens on your desk will write on their own if no one is watching. Perhaps the light above your head dims and brightens, just slightly to follow your mood, responding with subtle, polite attention. You chuckle softly to yourself, aware of the absurdity, yet comforted by the possibility. A drawer clicks, and in this imagined moment, you imagine it sliding open of its own accord, revealing objects you didn't even know you had stored. A pencil, a scrap of paper with faint numbers, a coin with a bird mid-flight. Nothing spectacular, nothing threatening. Just small treasures, waiting for discovery. You wonder if the objects notice you noticing them, if they recognize your hand hovering in thought, and decide to stay put or shuffle closer. You picture a corner of the archive where dust motes gather like a miniature audience. They float slowly in the air, forming patterns only you can see. Maybe they spell words when the light catches them just right, messages you'll never be able to read aloud, never be able to explain, but messages that somehow feel like recognition. You imagine leaning closer, squinting at the subtle movements, and the motes respond with polite stillness, leaving you to imagine the rest. Your chair creaks, and in this quiet, you imagine that it creaks differently when you think about possibilities. Not complaints or resistance, just commentary, a soft voice in rhythm with the archive's hum. Maybe it's laughing at the idea that anyone could ever perfectly predict what memories will arrive or when someone will need them. Maybe it's applauding your patience, your willingness to sit and hold possibilities gently, without urgency or expectation. You allow yourself to smile, feeling the small absurdity as comforting rather than strange. A thought surfaces, more playful than the last. Perhaps the lights themselves are mischievous. Maybe they know which memories you'd like to linger on, which postcards, which coins, which notes you might touch first. Perhaps they shift slightly when you aren't looking, guiding your eyes towards something you would never have noticed otherwise. You imagine the faint warmth of the bulbs brushing your skin differently when attention falls on the right object, as though the archive itself is a careful, silent friend. You imagine shelves bending slightly toward you, not dangerously, just enough to create the sense that the space is acknowledging your presence. You can hear it in the subtlest ways, a soft scrape of metal, a gentle shift of air, the faint click of a panel settling. Nothing you could explain. Nothing anyone else would notice. Just private, gentle responses to your quiet imaginings. Perhaps the objects themselves have little preferences, small personalities of their own. The postcard might sigh when lifted. The coin may tingle in anticipation of being held. The button might wobble in amusement if you examine it too carefully. You consider that every item in the archive has its own private rhythm, its own silent sense of self, only noticeable to those who pause long enough to notice. You do, and you enjoy the thought that, in some tiny way, your attention is recognized. Your mind wanders further. Maybe the archive will adjust itself when no one is looking. Perhaps aisles rearrange subtly, chairs rotate just enough to find the most comfortable angle, and shelves tilt ever so slightly to present objects more favorably. You imagine this happening invisibly, a quiet magic that ensures everything feels just right without interference, preserving the calm you've found. You imagine the hum itself taking on subtle nuances, responding to the rhythm of your breathing. Perhaps it rises softly when your mind drifts, falls slightly when you pause to notice a memory, and returns to its steady pulse when your attention returns to the archive as a whole. You feel a strange sense of companionship with something so abstract, a reminder that quiet observance can be just as comforting as direct interaction. Even the objects that seem mundane take on secret, lives in this imagination. The shell, with its spiral, might whisper faintly when the air shifts. The brass key might hum when held in the right hand. The pencil might sketch its own lines when left undisturbed. You allow yourself to sit with these thoughts, letting them fill the space without demanding attention or action. You picture an entire row of boxes, each one a miniature universe of memories, all aligned as though they know you are near. Perhaps they lean slightly toward you, not out of gravity or design, but as if anticipating your touch, your curiosity, your quiet engagement. You imagine the contents, shuffling gently, each object seeking the right angle, the best moment, to present itself to you. Your attention drifts to the smallest details, the way the light catches on metal corners, the softness of dust against a panel, the faint scent of recycled paper in a box. Perhaps these sensations exaggerate themselves when you notice them, as if aware of your focus. A corner might glint just a little brighter. A page might feel slightly warmer under your fingers. The archive, in your mind, has become an attentive participant, a private collaborator in your quiet fantasies. You even allow the idea of impossible objects to drift in, a pencil that never dulls, a button that fits no garment, yet belongs nowhere else, a coin that spins forever if set just right. None of it disrupts the calm. None of it demands resolution. You merely observe, enjoying the impossibility as if it were ordinary. And then, the smallest of ideas, maybe the archive knows when it is needed most. Perhaps the hum rises ever so slightly when you are most tired, the lights dim subtly to coax your eyes closed, and the air thickens gently with warmth and stillness. Perhaps everything here, objects, hum, light, space, conspires to create a perfect cocoon for thought and imagination, a space where quiet fantasies exist without consequence. You lean back finally, eyes half closed, breathing slow, noticing the faint pulse of electricity beneath your fingertips. You allow these small, improbable daydreams to settle like soft snowflakes, each one fleeting, yet distinctly remembered for its brief stay. They pass through you, leaving no disruption, only calm, only possibility, only a trace of quiet amusement at the gentle absurdity of it all. Nothing happens. Nothing changes. The thoughts simply pass and dissolve, lingering faintly in the air, in the hum, in the glow of panels, as if the archive itself has exhaled quietly and allowed you to rest in its stillness. You settle fully into the chair, letting its familiar contours support the weight of your body without effort. Every breath slows naturally, a gentle tide in and out, unhurried and even. The hum of the archive becomes part of the rhythm of your chest, soft enough that it almost disappears, yet steady enough to remind you that the space is alive in its own quiet way. The glow from the panels above is pale and consistent, washing the aisles in calm, muted light, as if nothing else exists beyond this room. The air touches your skin with a faint, reassuring temperature, neither warm nor cold, just balanced. You notice it fully now, the slight brush against your arms and neck, the way it moves across the surfaces of tables and boxes, carrying the faint scent of paper, metal, and the faint residue of lavender. It is a gentle layering of senses, each one soft and slow, leaving no single impression too sharp, no detail demanding attention. Your hands rest lightly on your lap. The palms feel smooth against the fabric of your clothing, each fingertip tracing small, almost imperceptible lines in the weave. You sense the weight of them without focus, each subtle pressure a reminder of presence. Even the tiniest touch becomes a marker in the stillness, a gentle tether connecting body, space, and thought. The chair beneath you sighs quietly, a low creak that blends seamlessly with the archive's hum. There is no discomfort in it, only confirmation that things exist exactly as they are. The walls are distant, yet near, solid yet silent, holding you in a way that does not constrain. Dust particles float lazily in the light, neither drifting aimlessly nor moving with purpose, simply existing in the air around you, present but unobtrusive, part of the texture of quiet. Your eyes rest softly on the nearest shelf, but they do not focus. Shapes and shadows merge with light and distance, forming a gentle collage of vertical and horizontal lines. Nothing is demanding attention. Nothing calls for interpretation. You are not thinking about objects, nor their purpose, nor the stories they might hold. You simply notice the space as a whole, its form and weight, the way it is held steady and unchanging, as if time itself has slowed to a careful crawl. Breath deepens subtly, filling the lungs in a quiet rhythm. You can feel it in your shoulders, your ribs, your back pressing lightly against the chair. The sound of air entering, leaving, is intimate but not intrusive, woven into the hum of the archive so that it becomes part of a larger pulse. The distinction between body and room blurs, each breathing with the other, steady and calm, perfectly aligned with this moment. The light on surfaces and panels reflects faintly, carrying hints of color and texture from objects near and far. You notice the gloss of a tabletop, the soft sheen on a coin you touched earlier, the reflection of the panels on the edge of a box. They are small, quiet details, entirely safe to observe, entirely safe to ignore. They coexist without friction, like notes in a slow chord, forming a background for your thoughts as they soften, fade, and eventually pause. Your mind drifts naturally without effort. Thoughts move more like water than fire, flowing slowly along channels you do not need to guide. Names, numbers, objects, wishes, all present without demanding narrative. Some surface briefly, only to fade. Others linger longer, yet each is softened by the surrounding stillness, cushioned by the hum and light, carrying no urgency, no emotion sharp enough to disturb your calm. The sensation of fabric against your skin is steady, comforting. Even the faint pressure of shoes, or the chair beneath you, feels like part of a larger texture. You notice the friction and release in small movements, a shift of weight, a subtle adjustment of arm or leg. Each motion is absorbed by the environment, leaving behind only the faintest echo, another layer of quiet sensation. Dust drifts along light beams. The effect is hypnotic, a slow, wordless dance that is entirely natural, entirely ordinary. You watch for a moment, and then your attention softens, no longer even watching, just knowing it is there. The archive becomes a single, continuous presence. Panels, shelves, boxes, hum, dust, air, chair, body, all held together in a gentle coherence that requires nothing of you except to exist within it. Your own heartbeat becomes noticeable, not as a drum or alarm, but as a subtle reassurance. Each pulse is a reminder of presence, steady and unintrusive. It blends into the archive's hum, into the soft flow of air, into the faint shifting of objects, becoming part of the overall texture of stillness. It is quiet and unremarkable, exactly as it should be, yet grounding in a way that makes every small detail seem safely contained. Breath continues to slow. The arms of the chair hold you without notice. Light washes the room without glare. Dust floats without urgency. The archive hums. Shadows hold their places. Surfaces reflect without demand. The air touches skin without distraction. Your body rests. Your mind rests. Sensation, sound, light, and space converge into a single, ongoing experience that needs no words, no conclusion, no signal of ending. Nothing moves beyond what is necessary. You notice a slight warmth from the panels, the texture of the chair, the faint hum in the walls. Everything exists in a gentle balance. Thought continues, yet it is soft, weightless, drifting without force. The self, as you know it, no longer matters. Identity, attention, purpose, all fade into the ambient space. You are simply part of the stillness around you, neither separate nor incomplete, neither distracted nor active. Everything you experience tonight, arrival, memories, small wishes, objects, quiet fantasies, lingers lightly, absorbed into the slow pulse of the archive. There is no ending. There is no summary. There is only ongoing quiet, deepened by breath, light, texture, and subtle sound. You rest within it fully. The story stops here, but only in the telling. The hum continues. Dusk continues. Light continues. Breath continues. You are held by the room, by the air, by the faint warmth of panels and presence. The self dissolves softly into the space around it, and the archive simply exists, holding everything gently in its careful, ongoing stillness.